All right, this chapter is going to be genetics. This is, in my opinion, the most fun chapter. So, kind of some real life situations and stuff, pretty cool. So, let's just hop right into it, start a new page, and your heading is genetics. So, there's some genetic terms that you guys have probably heard that maybe you didn't realize was genetics, but you've probably heard of something like father, like son, meaning the son is just like their father. Or she's got her mother's eyes, or a chip off the old block. Basically what that's saying is the offspring is very similar to the parents. Those are genetics terms. Some terms here that we're going to talk about: heredity, genes, and alleles. Go ahead and write this down. So go ahead and write down heredity and say the passing down of traits from parents to offspring. The passing down of traits from parents to offspring. Okay. You look and have certain skills. You look a certain way, have certain skills because your parents passed those genes on from them. And they got it from their parents, and they got it from their parents, and they got it from their parents. So certain traits that you have may be in your family for generations and maybe hundreds of years. Heredity, the passing down of traits from parents to offspring. Genes, I'd take a minute, write this down, please. Genes, sections of DNA on a chromosome that contain instructions for a trait. In the last chapter, we talked about nitrogen bases and A's and T's always going together and G's and C's always going together. Well, those A's, T's, G's, and C's, those combinations, a section of that would be a gene. And that combination is going to determine certain traits. You maybe have heard of, if you're a computer person, binary code, which basically means all computer code boils down to ones and zeros. So 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, whatever. Well, it's kind of the same thing with your DNA. It's all A, T's, G's, and C's, and based on that order, it's going to determine what traits that you have. And a section of that DNA is called genes. An allele, I'd write this down also. We're getting some vocab out of the way. Allele is a different form of the same gene for a trait. Different form of the same gene for a trait. So you would say there are multiple alleles for eye color. The main ones, brown and blue. Brown is an allele for eye color. Blue is an allele for eye color. When we looked in our book, we had earlobes, and we had attached and unattached earlobes. Those were different alleles for earlobes. All right, you don't need to write this, but I just gave the same example right there. What is genetics? I'd write down this definition right here. Genetics is the study of how alleles are passed from one organism to the next. Genetics is a study of how alleles are passed from one organism to the next. So, genetics is slightly different because it's the study of how is this happening? Why is this happening? What happens? That is genetics. And that's what we're going to be talking about this chapter. There was this dude named Gregor Mendel, the father of genetics. Write this down. Gregor Mendel gets credit for being the father of genetics. And I would write this down also. He did experiments with pea plants to see how certain traits were passed on. So a little backstory to Gregor Mendel. Gregor was an Austrian monk. And if you know from movies or whatever, a monk, okay, you've probably, maybe you think of like the big robe and sitting like crisscross, like humming or something. Okay, that's along the right path. But basically monks were people that swore themselves to God, and they lived in what we call a monastery. And they lived there, and they were self-sufficient. So they had their own gardens, their own livestock, and they basically took care of that stuff and prayed. And so life wasn't maybe the most interesting, and each group of people kind of had their own thing. Like Gregor was in charge of some gardens, and other people were in charge of maybe the chickens or whatever. But he spent a lot of time in his garden. And he noticed that with his pea plants, there were differences in the same pea plants. So he had these seeds, and he'd plant them, and he got to wondering, why does this one tall and this one is short? The seeds were exactly the same. Or why does this one have a purple flower and this one have a white flower? The seeds were exactly the same. So being, I guess, bored, he kind of became an expert with this. Another thing was wrinkly seeds or round seeds. Why did this happen? How could you predict how this would happen? And go ahead and write this down. He wanted to be able to predict what traits would occur. We are always trying to predict things. We as human beings want to predict what's going to happen next. Who's going to win the big game? What kind of grade am I going to get? If you ever buy a lottery ticket in your life, you're going to try to predict what number is going to pop up. So he wanted to make predictions. Why don't we stop there?